It's season 4, bitches! It's the Little Podcast of Horrors with James, Christina, and Chris.
Hello, friends. Welcome in. No one else is going to talk, so.
I like fostering an awkward silence for as long as possible, just to see what happens.
That is your forte.
Yes, that is.
So we actually have a special guest today. We have Aly Cardinalli back. Hello, welcome in, Aly.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm excited to be back.
Yeah, so if you guys are just joining us, make sure you check out part 1 of our interview with Aly. So Aly is a witch doctor, a psychic. He owns Bearbridge Academy for Witchcraft and Psychic Development. He owns Otso Salon, where you can hire a witch or a psychic. So he's got a lot going on. And we're really glad to get to interview you a second time.
Oh, the pressure is on, but I think I'm ready.
So anytime somebody says that, I just think of the song "Under Pressure."
Yeah.
I'm especially excited about this because it feels like coming full circle. So last season, you were one of the first people we interviewed, and like a series of interviews that followed of just all sorts of people from all sorts of different fields that we talked to. And since we talked to you last, we've talked to a psychedelics mentor, a former mega pastor turned sort of universalist. We've talked to a supernatural researcher about his book on UFOs, and just we've gotten so many interesting stories and points of view and stuff. And I feel like we're kind of coming full circle back to Aly after this whole tour of discovery we've done over the past few months.
Don't forget, we also interviewed a professor of esoterica.
Yes,
and of academia as well.
Yeah, that was a personal favorite. Yeah, we interviewed he's a religious studies professor who specializes in Western esotericism. So he's got like this big library behind him of just like ancient, rare, like magic books that have been lost to history that he's got like first editions of. I was like, man, I want to peruse that guy's library.
With felt.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, he even had one book, I don't remember what it was, but didn't he say a psychic came over the house and was like, did not want to be near that book?
Come near his library.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the whole library. Right.
He's like, not sorry, I'm not coming near some of those books.
Oh, and so here I'm hungry. I'm like, let me read them and let me read them.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, that sounds so exciting.
All right. Well, James, do you want to start us out? You said you had a lot of questions.
Well, I do.
Yeah, get to it, James.
I do want to share something I learned from Dr. Sledge, since we were just talking about him. So, and this is just a fun tidbit, but I found it kind of an ironic cherry on top of what we were talking in the last interview. So, Aly, when we were talking about sort of the religious shade that's been cast on magic and psychic practices over the centuries, and I liked how you put it that the barbarians tend to win over and over again. At the time, I had never, regarding my own faith, I had never really paid much attention to what my own scriptures say about magic, other than like it's bad, the end, because it was never something that was on my mind I ever thought about. I learned something from Dr. Sledge, from his material when I was researching his stuff, that was fascinating. So as a religious studies professor, he goes into like doing a lot of the translations himself, like he knows the ancient Hebrew and whatnot. So he's going through some of the Old Testament kind of clobber verses that we refer to, and it talks about magic being bad. I forget exactly where, like Deuteronomy, Leviticus, one of those two. What I found fascinating is he said, like, when you get into the original language, the scriptures are very specific about what magical practices are forbidden, and those terms are lost to time. Like, we have no idea idea what it was actually forbidding. So there's this irony now that here in the modern day, like anytime you have someone hitting you over the head, like, you know, book verse such and such says, you know, magic is evil and whatnot, they don't even know what they're forbidding. Like the language is lost to time. We don't even know what we're saying is not okay. We're just parroting what the English translation guessed. So I thought that was just such a cherry on top to what we talked about last time.
You're forbidden. I don't know what from.
I don't know what,
but don't you dare do it.
But it's totally okay if you're going to turn your staff into a snake. We know that one, I think, is okay. But other than that, everything else forbidden, but we don't know what. Yeah.
No, actually, the fascinating part, because we talked about and if you go into the Talmud in Judaism, there is actually some I don't know, lists or scriptures that talk about allowed magic, and the fascinating one is creating artificial life. It's on the okay list. And there's even a whole story about it where somebody creates an artificial human to prank a friend. If I'm paraphrasing that story well, so it's been a minute, but basically like creates an artificial human to prank a friend, and like when he meets the artificial human, it's like, oh, I see what's going on here. You're not a real human. It's like crazy story. So, but yes, artificial life completely okay.
We make our own friends. Making friends is hard, so make your own.
Make your own, right?
Yeah.
Especially as an adult,
It's hard.
has been forever, so just make your own friends, and that's why it's okay.
So I guess just to open with the first question here, this may be my own biases speaking or wishful thinking on my part, which guilty as charged, but something I noticed just talking to, you know, various people, and especially a lot of the people we interviewed, if there was a common thread that I saw between most everybody we talked to, was that regardless of if we're talking about psychedelic experiences or any of the other kind of stuff we talked about, the thread was that all these different views tend to share a belief is almost too weak a word, a conviction that there is something more than just the material. And I get really excited about that, because I think especially in Western culture we're so used to, you know, living by strictly empirical evidence and a materialist framework and whatnot. So anyway, I was wondering, have you noticed any sort of maybe using the term spiritual awakening is a little theatric, but that's the best term I could come up with. Have you noticed kind of an uptake in people becoming aware of the spiritual just across the board, of it being more accepted? And
I don't know if I've excuse me, I don't know if I've noticed that there is more. I think I've noticed that it's more talked about.
yeah.
I think it's still the same, because we as humans have always had this pervasive interest in spirituality and in something more than the physical since the beginning of time. And I think I mentioned last time that no matter how hard we try to squash it with science, and I would say bad science.
Yes.
And I say bad science because we decide that these 1, 2, 3 tests are the only possible tests to say something exists or doesn't exist, which is not scientific. That ends up being a kind of confirmation bias. Yes. But the fact that we as people have been hungry since Neolithic times to connect to something that we cannot see, but we can feel, we can experience, still yet, even through science saying this, there is no soul in this book, there's no soul there, we're just talking about it more, but it's always been there. And it's been across every, what's fascinating is it's been across every continent of people, and they haven't had any access to each other. So from the beginning of time, we as people have been interested in the spirit of things, or animistic belief that there is a soul in everything, and that's shamanic practices, and then that feeds into standard dogma, and then into kind of the faiths that we have today. And it all starts right at the beginning during Neolithic times, when people were spiritual before they were agrarian. I think we're talking about it more.
Yeah, definitely. So it segues into a second question. I like how you brought up bad science. So maybe kind of a dumb question, but kind of I know the answer to this, but I still wanted to hear your take on it. Do you have, especially since you run a school, do you ever have any interaction with people from the scientific or academic communities who show interest in what you do in your school, or do you find that the majority response from that world is still like it's all hogwash?
I have never had anyone come to the school, take a class, and say this is all hogwash.
Cool.
Never. And it's because we don't teach from a cult mentality of follow this teacher. We sit down and we're like, here are books, here's repeatable outcomes, and here is history. So if it's not based in repeatable outcomes, then we talk about historical or cultural relevance, especially when it comes to the witchcraft or faith practices. And the school is separated into 4 departments. So in our psychic and shamanic department, most of it has repeatable outcomes, because as a psychic, in order to say that you are psychic, you have to be able to repeat it. But in the faith department, it's going to be based on culture and history, and science can't come in and say that's not real. It's historical. We're not talking about whether something is has empirical evidence. We're talking about this has cultural significance. So I've never had anyone walk in and say this is hogwash. They're mostly fascinated and interested, and learning how to incorporate both into their lives.
Right. Yeah, the reason I ask is because I had learned something interesting that I had no idea of previously. So going back to Dr. Sledge, the University of Amsterdam is kind of the center of this and the one spearheading it. But since about the 90s, the study of Western esotericism has actually been an official academic field, like under the umbrella of religious studies, which is like a first, because like up until this point, like the academia was like having none of it. And so we had this fascinating conversation about like up until now, part of the tragedy is like all these magical texts across antiquity, like the ones that are still surviving, like if you even want to get your hands on them, it's a first edition. Like they haven't been republished, they haven't been studied, they've just been kind of thrown off to the trash bin of history. But now today, there's kind of a crack in the wall, and there's finally an official study in academia it's a crossroads of a philosophy, religion, and science, that they're cracking all this open and revisiting it and actually doing an official study now. And I get really excited that that's the thing now.
That is fantastic. And I just think more people are talking about it and willing to learn. That's the change in what's happening right now. Is it's not people are becoming more enlightened. It's people are willing to talk about it and be more tolerant of learning, instead of learning it behind closed doors and pretending like nobody's learning it.
Yeah. And hush hush. Hide all your books so nobody can see.
And then one other question I wanted to throw in that I just picked up from our previous interviews was so we talked to Trace Bell, a psychedelics mentor. So he's like an officially licensed out of California psychedelics coach. And some of the things we learned from him was fascinating, just talking about how, especially when done under the guidance of someone with some expertise and in a healthy way, that people through psychedelic experiences are having just cosmic revelations of some sort of intelligence or spirit other that they're becoming aware of, and through that experience, like, you can't unsee what you've seen after that experience. But and he's talked about how this has been just life changing for so many people, that it's opened their eyes to, sort of like a colorblind person seeing color for the first time, opening their eyes that from that point forward their lives are never the same. And I was wondering that, in your practices with the psychic and the magical, if there's ever any overlap with psychedelics or any other substances or stuff.
Great question. In my personal practice, there is no overlap in psychedelics because we're exorcists. And it makes it, when you engage in psychedelics or other substances that can soften your soul so that you can experience, people like me, let's say that there's a fiber of your soul that if we can talk about in something tangible, it softens the fiber enough so that non-psychic people can experience the psychic, but someone like me, it's already pretty loose so that I can experience, and it loosens more, and then a spirit can get in. So there's a big hard no with certain substances for people like me, because I interact with spirits that can jump in when the netting is a little too loose.
Yeah, wow.
Oh,
that's
Chris, if you're talking, you're muted.
So basically it would be something along the lines of, like, for somebody like you, doing something like that would just throw the door wide open. Somebody who is
stuff
that
you don't want.
It would say, so there are spirits that kind of, so for those people who are listening to the first time, I'm a dark medium, which means that entities are the kinds of things that I interact with as a medium. So the monsters are things that go bump in the night, or demons, or creatures, or kami, or like other entities that are not necessarily human. So I'm sitting in my living room, and a spider dog like creature moves across the room and then exits. It's here and it leaves. If I'm experiencing psychedelic substances and my spirit is wider and the net is bigger, it means there's a hole in it that creature that walks by that normally would just leave, goes, do I want to crawl in there? That might be, what's that like? And it might not be a full possession. It might just be an attachment and an exit, or it connects and will stick. So there's, with people that I train as exorcists, there's a big rule of no substances, no substances, no substances. Now, there are certain substances recreationally that are okay, but believe it or not, for someone like me, cannabis is one that's on the do not do list.
Oh,
I know, but I'm all for legalizing it, but I personally, it's on the do not list. Whereas I've never been someone who has engaged in substances because of the kind of psychic I am anyway, but things that are on the okay list are other kinds of hallucinogenics, like okay, for instance, like if I wanted to do that, that would be on the okay list because it doesn't fray or spread out the spirit. So it's interesting what's okay, what isn't okay. And then if we look at drug laws, what's okay and what isn't okay.
right.
It's just kind of interesting, especially for someone who's a medium, what's not okay.
Going back, I'm sorry, Christine. I was just going to say,
No, go ahead.
You mentioned spider dog entity.
It's like, let's pause on
Very
that.
casually.
Just very and you said it with such just like an everyday, like, oh, there's, like, I would be like, oh, look, there's a robin. Whereas Aly, you're just like a spider dog entity, where I'd be like, oh, what?
There's Fido visiting.
Be like, I'm curious, do you have interactions that make you a little less comfortable in those situations? Like, like come across and be like, oh, that's not that's not normal.
Does any
Or
of
that's-
this
or that's
bring
not common, I
existential
guess.
dread with it?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I think
Because,
it's
like-
the fear element.
Yeah.
So I have learned that just because, excuse me, I have learned that just because something is ugly doesn't mean that it's dangerous.
Okay.
So there's that aspect of it of
Mhm.
we are taught in horror movies that because something is ugly, it means that it's out to eat you or hurt you. And that's not actually the case when it comes to entities. Just because it's ugly doesn't mean that it's there to harm you. So there's that rule first. Because I was always like this, there really isn't a shock factor anymore. My shock factor comes from if I don't see it coming. Like if suddenly
Okay.
someone's there, then of course it's like if suddenly there's a person standing behind you, right? That would make you jump. You didn't expect it. But seeing creatures is a natural part of my life, so it's not that big of a deal. And I mentioned that specific creature because where I used to live in Hutto, in a tiny little town in Texas, my next door neighbor knocked on my door and said, "Hey, I think we have a spirit problem. My son is drawing these things and he's not sleeping at night and he says he sees stuff, and can you come over?" And I said, "Sure." So I have a Mayan death whistle. They're super gross. You shouldn't ever clean them, but when you blow into it, it tastes like centuries of death. It's gross.
Delicious.
Not a spicy meatball.
Oh, that's a new gum flavor.
Oh God, they're so gross. But what's great about them is it does make entities like peek out, like they look.
Mhm.
So it makes you go, "Oh, there you are." So I went onto her property and I blew the whistle, and out came this dog spider thing. And there's a old Italian way to capture or to kind of collect spirits, and it's pretty safe, and use a birdhouse and some flowers, and basically you're making like a little home really quick to remove it, like catch and release. So caught it. I brought it back to my house and I couldn't get it to leave. And so it ended up just being kind of a part of the family and just hung out, and it ended up finding a comfortable place underneath the porch, and that's where it resided. I guess they don't live. It resided under the front porch, and that's where it stayed. And for my family, that was just normal. It was, you could see the dogs both watch this thing, but they also get up to like growl or chase it. They're like, "Oh, something else lives here now." And my family, they were playing video games when I came home with this, and they're like, "So what is a spirit?" And I said, "Well, I'm probably not going to describe it to you, but it's just kind of, it acts kind of like a dog, but it doesn't look like a dog. It's, just, I guess it's just here now."
Ow.
So was that what the kid was drawing? Did their picture align with what you saw?
Yes, yeah. So I described it to the mom and I said, "It looks like a hairless dog with extra legs, and its face is very long, oblong shaped, like a football, and its eyes are narrow, but its body's kind of like a dog, but has extra legs." And she said and she went and got the drawing of, "Oh my gosh, that's what he's drawing, is this like fucked up spider." Well, so we named it, and because it lived with us, and it's a stupid name, but we named it Rex. So Rex entity lived with us.
Okay, so we're talking about entities. I've been wondering, are there, and I should have fully thought out this question before I started talking, but are there entities that are like native to a land? Like you might find a certain type of entity in North America, but probably not in like Asia or anything like that?
Absolutely. I
concept?
think we can track that in folklore.
Mhm.
Is there are certain entities that reside in an area, much like if we look at zoology, we can look at the same thing with cryptozoology, and there are spirits that reside in certain areas. However, I have found that there are creatures that do reside in different continents, or the same entity resides on different continents, but has only been documented in one culture.
Okay.
Okay. So as somebody who I lived with something when I was a child, this is just like I never considered this until now. So when I was a kid, we lived in this house where a lot of strange things happened, lots of paranormal activities. But the thing that stood out the most, and tell me if this sounds familiar to you in any way, like if you ever encountered anything like this, was best is it was this creature that was white. And I guess my father was the one that saw it. He said it was, I guess, about, oh, this, you can see, like about this tall, something like that. But it had legs like a human. And my father was on the couch, like taking a nap during the middle of the day. And the story goes that he said he was starting to wake up. And when you're waking up and your eyes are kind of peeking, he could see this thing just standing in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, just watching him. And I will never understand this. My father said that he then jumped up and ran at it, and it squealed and turned around and ran, but then it just like popped and it was gone. And I remember thinking, like, what if you had caught it? What were you gonna do? But the thing is, I heard it at night. I could hear its little feet running on the linoleum floor and it messing with the dishes and playing. Have you ever, does that sound familiar to you at all? Like,
Oh, yes. Yeah. So there are, in folklore, there are tons of different kinds of brownies in like that brownie category, or domicile little people, things that live in or near a home. Where I grew up in Hawaii, we had the menehune, and they were troublesome little people that could prank you, could harm you, could help you, hard workers. But then you have the brownie, you have a domovoi is in the same category. Yeah, there's quite a few of that elf-like creatures, although elves can more be problematic in type. But yes, so you probably had, since there was only one, it does help narrow down that it's not elf, because those generally live together. He said it was white, so that takes out menehune because they're brown. Brownies are usually also brown. But it could also be pigmentless for some reason, like maybe it's a one-off. Instead of assuming that they all look like that, maybe it is an albino in that one category. So there's that to also consider. But yes, lots of people have domicile-based spirits that are like little people, and they usually cause problems unless you give them something to do or you show respect. So my going back to Hutto, my other neighbor, I felt very accepted living there because my neighbor, what I did for a living, and they're like, "Hey, we have a problem." And I'm like, "Do the other neighbors know that a witch doctor lives on this corner?" And they're like, "No, we just talk amongst ourselves." I was like, "Okay, so everybody knows." But the other neighbor, she knocked on my door, and same thing. Like, she's like, "Can you come down? I don't know, maybe there's a problem." And she did end up having a spirit problem on her horse ranch. However, while I was passing the house, they said, "You have brownies that live here." And I'm so jealous because I would love to have brownies live at my house. "You have brownies." And she's like, "What are those?" So I explained that they usually live in a group. Like you said, Chris, they're little people. They will pop up and stare. But with brownies, they can be troublesome if you don't give them a task. So I asked, do your husband's tools go missing? And as in go missing, do they end up in bushes, like random places? And she's like, yeah, all the time. I thought he was just absent-minded. And I was like, well, how absent-minded are you that you left your hammer in a bush? Like, no one's that absent-minded.
I
So
might be.
brownies here, what you could do to appease them is if you make some rice or you make anything that's kind of sweet, just leave a bowl for them outside your house. They literally live next to your house or right here. And I said, I would love to just talk to them. And she's like, you can come anytime. And I said, talk about the weird neighbor. All right. So it's already weird what I do for a living. Could you imagine if I walk over to your house, I'm talking to your bushes and feeding your bushes? I'm not going to be
what is wrong with them?
That man of talking to a bush. Did he just give it wrath?
I wonder if that's similar to the story we heard just recently. So we interviewed an author by the name of Tim Swartz, who he's written tons of stuff about UFOs and cryptids and all sorts of supernatural things. He's like an Emmy awarded producer dude. But a story he told this reminds me of a story that he was telling us in the interview we did with him. He was talking about, I think it was in the 80s or 90s. There was this elderly couple and moved into a house that was supposedly super haunted. And at the time, he was working with a local TV station and went out with the TV crew to see if they could catch anything. And so he was talking about that. He was a kind of seasoned professional at the time, so like he had battery backups upon battery backups upon battery backups to ensure there's like no possibility of equipment failure. The equipment failed as soon as they started to try to roll film. Like all the batteries, all the backups, everything was dead. But what followed after that is he said he basically saw what looked like little rocks, little gravel, just kind of materialize in the air and then fall to the ground. And he was really curious, so he picked up some of the rocks, took a black marker and like drew an X on some of them, and then threw them outside, like out into the field. And he said when it happened again, not all, but some of the rocks that fell had the X's on them. I find that fascinating. But is that similar to what we're talking about here, the little kind of prankster thingy?
Yes, in fact, there are, I think some of the best known stories are in Hawaii with the Menehune.
Yeah.
If you cannot drive over Pali Lookout, which is on Oahu, after midnight with pork in your car, or they will stop your car until you throw the pork out.
I've heard of this.
Wow.
Yeah, that's actually how it was. It's an Hawaiian goddess. She takes like the form of a wolf, I think. Yes.
Yeah, she will show the form of a white dog, an old woman, or a young maiden, always in white. And it's because Kamapua'a is her ex-husband, and you're showing favor with that. So if you throw that out, then she's like, okay, you're on my side. But you're going from one side of the island to the other side of the island, and you should not be traveling with pork after midnight in your car, or she will stop it till you get rid of it. Or the Menehune will stop it on her behalf. So when it comes to folklore, of course, there's different versions of why things happen, but the same is you don't travel with pork in your car, or the electricity in your car will stop.
Wow.
Dang.
And it's not well lit, and you're on a cliff, like just don't do it. Just like, oh, I want to do it. Why? Why?
What are you thinking?
So while we're on the topic,
Throw the sandwich out.
Right?
Sorry.
No bacon,
You're
no
delicious,
nothing.
but you're gone.
Sorry,
so while we're on the topic of entities, we did in our first season, we did an episode on the topic of shadow people. And I had come up with the topic because my mother had a story of an encounter with one that creeped me out like my entire life. So I thought, I was like, you know what, if we do a story about it and just laugh about it, so that would be some good therapy for me. And it turns out ever since we've done that episode, we keep getting feedback of people saying, it's like, oh, I have a shadow person.
Oh yeah.
Oh great.
And then we had a shadow person in my room. Like it's like as soon as we did the story, it's suddenly like, okay, everybody, now it's happening. It happened to me once, so my wife.
So the spectrum that we've had of stories from people since that episode, like one of them has been a little bit more benign. He's described his as kind of almost looking like a Viking dude, like a shadow Viking dude with a shadow dog with him that comes and visits every so often, but just kind of hangs out, doesn't really do anything. But on the other side of the spectrum, we've had a friend report to us one that's been a lot more menacing, that he hasn't been able to get the experiences to stop, and they've just been, associated with horrible nightmares and stuff like that. So anyway, since we've known multiple people now who've had the experience, especially those with like really nasty experiences, do you have any sort of advice or any experience with those that you could share?
Yes, I do. So we're talking about two different things. So shadow people themselves are probably humans who are astral projecting and their spirit is walking around. That is probably the situation.
Really?
Yes.
That's cool.
So if you see them, it's just someone who is out of their body. They're not quite dead. They're not quite alive. I mean, they are alive. Their spirit is just detached from their body for that moment. And you just happen to see them. Some people don't know that they astral project. It's usually right before they go to sleep when their brain is in theta, or right before they're going to wake up. Again, the brain waves are in theta and they separate and they're spirit walking. And you see a shadow person, it's just somebody wandering around. Most humans that shadow walk or spirit walk, they don't even know that they can do it or that they are doing it. So it's benign and they're just standing there staring, thinking that they're dreaming.
Wow.
So that is that. And even if they're Viking, again, it's someone who in that dream form believes like that's how they present themselves with
cool.
their power animal is with them. That dog is probably their power animal, and that's what that is. Now, the other category, they're not the same thing, is bogarts or the boogeyman. And they are the most common parasitic entity across every form of culture. If you Google boogeyman or you Google bogart and you look in Wikipedia, you will see that it is the longest list of names from every culture, including that. And the night hag, everybody's like, my sleep paralysis demon, her name is Helga.
Yeah.
So there's that shadow person, but they're not shadow people. They're a different entity completely. They're not humans walking around astral projecting. They're a completely different entity. And they consume, if we go back to what we talked about at the beginning of the episode, where everything has spirit, they consume the fear element in spirit. So if you're afraid, that's what they need to eat, is that energy that you give off, that fear energy. And so they're going to do what they need to do in order to make you afraid so they can eat.
Yeah.
Are they actually going to hurt you? No, because they need you as a food source. So they're not going to hurt you. They're just going to create a fearful environment so that they can eat, including sleep paralysis, including nightmares, including saying that they're going to possess you. They're not going to. So the best advice you can do is laugh. I know that sounds totally ridiculous, but that's what I was taught growing up, especially as a child. So I have a twin sister, and you can imagine when we were afraid, the two of us would hold hands, like walking home, and we would be laughing and singing. Talk about, like, I think anybody who was a predator was afraid of us. Like these,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. These creepy
twins
kids
that are like la 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 and just like laughing through the
Come play with us, Bogart. Come play.
Yeah, it's maybe they were smart. My parents were really smart. They're like, just laugh and people will, the monsters and people will leave you alone. So yeah, just laugh. And then if you have an infestation, clean your house. That's first. Have lots of light. Play music, have a party, laugh, play reruns of Roseanne, listen to Whitney Houston or Michael Jackson. Like, it just needs to be lighter, and they will leave because they need to eat. So they will find someone else. They'll just leave.
Interesting. Okay.
Super easy. Just literally just laugh, play some good music, have a party, they'll go away.
Awesome.
See, mine
Such a
seemed to go
simple,
away.
elegant solution.
Mine went away really fast because my wife saw it at the same time my friend was seeing it in Washington State. And she woke up just for a moment, but then she apparently heard my dead father's voice say, "You need to leave."
Oh,
And
geez.
then it was
Oh.
gone. And I was like, "Thanks, Dad."
There you go.
Wow. Looking out for you.
See, and that might have been a shadow person who's having this nightmare, and they're in your house having a nightmare, and there's a ghost that shows up and says, "You need to leave," and they wake up in their home in Illinois, and they're like, "That
Just
was
in a cold
so scary.
sweat.
What a weird dream I had," and they were just you're walking in your home talking to dead people.
See, that just the three of us, they knew my father, we've all been friends for decades. And so that would be hilarious. Some person wakes up and like, this guy with a beard was like, "God is lavish." He had this run. It was a whole, what am I trying to say? Private joke about my father. And he used to do this little prayer and something about God is lavish, the unfailing abundance. But we always joke about him just saying God is lavished. I even told him before he died, I said, "I'll know it's you if you just say God is lavished." So I just love the idea of some guys like he looked like a singer. He told me to leave. Weird dream. Anyway, is there coffee?
Right? Like that is someone's that experience was someone else's nightmare. That poor person in Illinois woke up being like, "Oh man, that was so weird."
So how common do you think it is for people to accidentally spirit walk like that? Is it
Oh.
super common?
I think it's common. I think we all have the ability because, again, it is something that has been a part of us since the beginning of time. It was squashed and it was stopped because of fear and because of control from people who couldn't do it, right? Like we have almost like the sneeches on beaches. Like we're going to say, "Oh, you have, so I'm going to stop," and create fear around this. And it's the same thing with people who are psychic or people who are witches and have the connection to the soul of ingredients and can make other things happen with the craft or the cookery of soul in order to make spells. Let's demonize these things, spirit walking included, so that those of us who are more numb aren't vulnerable.
Yeah, don't feel threatened.
Right. Instead of what I hope in my lifetime and my mission is to say, why not use us and hire us? Why not come to us for help and have a better life instead of being afraid of us?
Yeah. So this reminds me, the like spirit walking and all that accidentally while you're sleeping. I've had several like intertwined dreams with other people. So like the same night we'll have a dream where we're in each other's dream and we're doing the same things, like we're interacting. Is that the same sort of phenomenon, or is it just like a psychic link thing? I don't know I've never known what to think of that.
I was dating someone who is a dream walker, and he would show up in people's dreams. And
Okay.
although I cannot do that, I understand from the plane of existence thing where the mental plane is where all of our thoughts and all information goes. We could call it the Akashic plane. That's where the dream state is because they're thoughts. And could people run amok and play in that area instead of in the spirit plane? Absolutely. I don't see why not. That's where geniuses access their information psychically, as they just understand things that wasn't taught to them. Why couldn't we also, in rest, be able to journey to that place and run amok together?
Okay, I like that idea. I guess we're playing together in the field of Akashic records or whatever.
Yes, you just out there playing. And people always think that the Akashic records are, it's so scholarly, like, oh, this is where you can get information, but it's also where creativity and imagination and other thought forms exist, like dreams. So why wouldn't that, in that mental plane, be a place where you could meet up with other people and frolic in dreams and
Interesting.
creativity?
So that reminds me of so I did a couple episodes on Nikola Tesla, which is how we ended up interviewing the author of a book on the topic. But so take this with a grain of salt, of course. But the claim is that the root claim behind this is that there are some journals of Tesla that had been lost, were found by a guy for a time, and he was able to read them and kind of take notes on them, and then they were lost again. To cut a very long story short. So all that to say that nothing that I'm about to say is verifiable anyway, but still fun. Supposedly from his journals, he had talked about for many years throughout his life, he had experienced visions that were so vivid that at night in his dreams, he would live another life in another place that was so real that he was forming relationships with other people and like having fully fledged, like in-depth relationships with folks. And it also reached the point to where he could he didn't have like he created a lot of his inventions in that sort of dream world, because like he didn't even need to conduct real life experiments, because the experiments he could conduct while in these visions would be just as reliable and authentic that he could move forward with them. And that sounds like, again, no way to verify that, but again, it sounds like so akin to what you're talking about, as like, even though it's in a dream, it's on another plane, it has some sort of reality to it.
Oh, I think that's very much the case. And I guess we could explain it away and say that the subconscious is processing and learning and creating while in a state of relaxation. But why couldn't it be both?
Right.
Why do we have to say that it's one or the other? And that's where, unfortunately, Western thinking gets in the way. Is we're so sports team oriented that we have to be team one or the other, and we can't possibly imagine that it could be both. It could be, all right, in his subconscious, he is processing and figuring out experiments without having to do them because he's that brilliant. And that space where he's doing that is called the Akashic plane, and he is outside of himself while he's doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Right.
See, I'm somebody who has like, I've wondered this about myself because I have incredibly vivid dreams, and sometimes I've wondered if they were more than dreams too. So that answers, that's interesting to think about. Like I'll see like my father and my grandmother constantly in dreams, and I have conversations with them, and it's very vivid. So that's a neat thing. That's a neat concept.
Actually, that leads to another question I had, since we're talking about sort of the supernatural and the scientific intersecting. This may be a dumb question, mind you, because it's a topic I don't know much about, but it's been knocking around my brain forever. I want to get it out there. So exorcisms, since that's a topic you know intimately well, obviously nowadays the idea of exorcism is far less accepted in the mainstream, right? And in most cases, the scientific or medical community is going to lead you to therapy. I have wondered, given what little I do know or have heard about exorcism, could one argue that today's therapy is almost a type of exorcism itself? And the reason I've pondered that is, you have somebody who's, possessed of very dark, destructive, self-destructive thoughts, and you're countering that with self-talk and self-love and self-acceptance, and in a sense those are two forces going against each other. Is like, am I a crazy person for thinking that, or might there be some dialogue there?
I'm gonna answer with yes and no.
Uh-huh.
So it is very important in my practice that clients have therapy after an exorcism. And again, that it's not mutually exclusive. There is an entire intake where we take into consideration mental obstacles or mental disease. We take into consideration environmental factors, including chemical. And of course, the psychic factors of having a psychic there that says, is there even something here?
Yeah.
But with that, it's not just go in and the power of Christ compels you and you're trying to get rid of this thing in a violent way. The person also needs healing afterwards. So as I said earlier, if something jumps in and there's now a hole in my spirit where something resides, once that exits, the hole is still there. And that's a piece missing in Catholic work, is there has to be healing that goes on. One, there has to be a spiritual healing of some kind to patch that up. And what they went through was cognitively horrifying. So they need to go to therapy as well. They need to go to therapy. They need to go to therapy, period. Most clients, I will tell you, refuse to go to therapy.
Interesting.
And it is something that all of my practitioners that study under me and myself push heavily. And if they don't want to do talk therapy, there are other forms. And we're like, you try art therapy, you can try dance therapy, you can try journaling. And here are some books we recommend if you don't want to talk to someone. But you need to do this because what happened to your brain is damaging, and we need to heal that as well. Otherwise, it opens you up for another possession.
Right.
Now, when it comes to what if they aren't possessed? What if there's not an actual entity, but they believe that there is? Or what if they have created their own parasitic entity that is attacking them? Which has also been a case of mine, where they've created an artificial elemental and it is possessing them. Literally, their own spirit and their own brain is so unhealthy that they have created out of their spirit another spirit to harm them. They need, one, medication from a licensed professional, and they need therapy.
Yeah.
An exorcist can get rid of it, but they're just going to create another.
Right, right.
They have to go to therapy. And in therapy, they are going to heal a lot of that work. Now, I'm going to say this to listeners as well. When it comes to therapists, not everybody graduates at the top of their class.
Right.
If someone sucks for you, fire them, move on, get a new therapist.
Yeah,
I have
that's
done
good.
that and wholeheartedly agree.
Me too.
Yes, and remember, therapists are not your friend. It's not someone you're paying for to be your friend. It's there to do work. They're there to help you heal. Now, my therapist, could you imagine this poor man having to hear what my day at work is like? And he has told me several times, he's like, I don't have any advice because I have no idea what to tell you. And some of what you tell me, frankly, really scares me.
Yeah,
There are
like
no
Spider Dog
academic
living
books.
under the porch.
He says, I don't think anyone was going to ever equip me to have someone like you as a but here are some skills we're going to go through. And I'm like, thank you so much. And that I can just talk to you and know that there's no judgment.
Yeah.
And even someone with a sometimes dangerous job like mine, we need to talk through it in a safe space. And don't worry about the therapist. They have their own therapist. They need to take care of themselves.
Yep.
Spider Dog. There are no psychology books about how to deal with spider dogs.
Exactly.
So I believe one of the services you offer is called a soul retrieval. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Could you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
Yes. When someone goes through a trauma, part of us dies. And when that part of us dies, it's a fracture. Part of your soul fractures off. And like when we die, it goes to that spirit space, that other world. A soul retrieval is done by a shamanic practitioner who is trained and who does not use substances in order to do the work. And I'm saying that so that viewers don't get swindled. It is someone who is trained as a shamanic practitioner and healer to journey out of their body to the spirit world to retrieve those items, those parts of their soul, to bring back and integrate them back into their client. How do you know if you need a soul retrieval?
I was going to ask that.
Well,
Aly's asking his own questions. We'll just let him go. He's got this.
I'll go get myself a glass of water.
if people are feeling like, I mean, the answer is part of your soul missing because of something terrible that's happened to you. And terrible is subjective to each person. Things like, do you have difficulty with your direction in life? Do you have undiagnosable lethargy? I mean, if you don't go to bed, maybe go to bed, right? If you're like, I'm tired all the time, but I only get 3, like, go to bed then.
Yeah.
Maybe exercise a little bit. Do you have some fears that, again, aren't rooted in applicability? Like there's a reason why there's fears. But it's mostly, do you have a loss of direction in life, or feel cloudiness, or like some of you is missing? And I think if you sit there and go, am I whole? If you're not, you need a soul retrieval. And here, soul retrievals are relatively simple for the practitioner. You don't need multiple unless you've been through a lot of trauma and the practitioner can't carry all the pieces back. Then you may need a second one. A soul retrieval, the process is you relax, you lay down, you listen to the same drumming that the practitioner listens to. They journey out of their body, they collect the pieces, they bring them back, and they put them back inside you. The integration process takes about a month, but you start to feel more and more clear 6 months to 2 years. It just keeps getting better. The first 6 days are generally the worst, with since you are fully whole, your emotions are then reactive. And so lows feel really low and highs feel really high, but it's only 6 days. And so as a healer, I will say, you've been through trauma, you can get through 6 days.
Mm-hmm.
You can do this, mark your calendar and go, just warn your family that you're like, oh, I feel so awful and I'm angry, and it's just gonna be a rough 6 days, 6 to 8 days, and then it's done. And then life looks clearer. Life is just easier because you're whole. Your direction is, this is what my soul is meant to do, whom I'm supposed to be around. I'm on the right path.
Okay. So someone comes to you, they say, I don't know where I'm going. I feel like I'm in a fog all the time. Like, I think I need this soul retrieval. How easy or difficult is it for you as the practitioner who does these things to like diagnose that is what they need?
Pretty easy. I will just scan their spirit to see, is there a chip? Are there pieces missing? Does it not feel vibrant? Does it not feel whole? There was one client though where I thought that was the case, and I sat down to do the soul retrieval and there was nothing to get. And I came back and I said, hi, I know you've been through some hard times, but nothing fractured you. There's nothing to get. So we can do some spiritual counseling and talk about those bad things that happen to you, but I can't provide a service that there's nothing to do. And she said, that actually makes a lot of sense for me. And thank you for saying that. Yeah, I have been through a lot, but I feel like nothing's ever fractured me, that I'm okay. I'm good.
Okay.
And she was referred to me from her daughter, and her daughter's like, Mom, you've been through so much, you need to get this. And I was like, there's nothing for me to do.
Okay.
You're whole.
How dangerous is the process for you as the person like leaving and going and trying to carry these things back?
It is not dangerous except for the last step.
Okay. Go walk us through that.
Put the pieces back in the person. So if the practitioner does not do that last step, and that's where the training comes in, put the pieces back, then they end up having pieces of someone else's soul inside them, and you need an exorcism.
Oops.
Oh. You made an oopsie.
So it's very surgical in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's and that last step is not difficult, but it's a step where people who are dabbling, or they read some of the brilliant books by Sandra Ingerman on soul retrievals, but they don't get training and they don't do that last step, could really get hurt. And it's the practitioner that gets hurt. The client is still without their whole soul. Right. And now the practitioner is holding it hostage against their own will. And you need someone, again, like me, to go, okay, we need to take that out and put that here. Which is a lot harder than just doing a soul retrieval the first time.
So you also do some past life work, correct?
I do.
Okay, so I feel like you already know my question. So if you don't get a soul retrieval done and you pass and then you are reincarnated, are you reincarnated with that missing piece? Do you find each other, or are you reincarnated as like an incomplete soul?
In many cases, it fixes itself, right? So those pieces are dead and they're just hanging out. And when you die, they integrate. Okay.
Oh, that's where I left it. Here we go.
You cross the veil and it's like, hey, pieces, let's together, I guess.
I missed you.
When it comes to past life healing, it's a different part of the soul.
Okay.
And it's the most dangerous form of healing that there is, because if I were to do a past life healing on James, how separated I have to be from myself. So I have to travel down James's history of his incarnations, stop at the right point of the incarnation that is injured. I then have to journey to the spirit world from there and get those pieces. You're so separated from yourself as a practitioner that James is my anchor. If he gets up and moves while I'm working, I will go into a coma. I will lose my way back to my physical body, which is why I don't teach it. And as a practitioner, it's a very expensive healing that I do, of which I need to be in person, and I have to trust that they aren't going to get up, because they have to kill me.
That's a titanic amount of trust.
That's
right.
Yeah. See, I'm really fascinated by the idea of past lives. We've all been talking about that amongst our group for a while now. So
regression is a much, simpler, easier.
See, I want to do that. I want to do that so badly.
And instead of doing past life regressions, what I do is the kind of readings I do is, again, travel down that person's history. So if I were to do a past life reading for Chris, I would enter the first kind of trance, and I'm totally awake, but I lose my eyesight so that I can see through your eyes in your past life.
See, that's the visual. I'm very curious too about a lot of things you've been talking about, like the soul retrieval, and I'm very curious about what's the visual on that? Like, what do you see when you're doing these things?
For past lives, it's like I'm watching TV, but I can also feel it. It's like VR. It's like that.
Okay.
Where I tell you as much as I can. I try to explain as much as I can about what's happening. And I try to look at my own hands so I can tell you how old you are, what your race is, if you're male or female. But I don't know unless I see a mirror or unless so that's kind of a problem, or unless I look down and I can see what clothes I'm wearing, then I could say we're here. But I also don't speak every language. So if I hear a language that I don't know, I'll say it sounds like this. The environment looks like this. It looks like it could be somewhere in the Middle East, or it could be somewhere, but I haven't been every place. So I'm guessing based on what little Aly knows, and I don't know everywhere from everything. So I just try and explain as much as possible. When it comes to soul retrieval, the spirit world is kind of like Alice in Wonderland. So how you experience someone's fractured pieces is going to be sometimes literal and sometimes metaphorical. And if I were to do one for James, when I come back, I write notes, and then after I send back the pieces, I write notes because I'm going to forget, and then say, do you want to hear what I experienced? But it doesn't necessarily mean they're literal. But James knows what they mean. He's like, oh my God, that was the time that this happened.
You see a lot of Transformers.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You would
Sorry,
see
I
a
had to, I'm
lot
sorry.
of
Throw me under the
Transformers.
And I would come back and go, they were robot things?
See, this stuff is what fascinates me so much. And like Christine and I, especially, we've talked a lot about like soul pods, because, you know, a lot of us, we always feel like we love the idea that we've been together through many lives just because of how close we all are. Is that something you ever, I mean, have you ever encountered something along those lines? Like people who continually find each other in each life, like something like that. Have you ever encountered anything like that with clients or students?
Yeah, and some people call it a soul contract or soul families or soul pods. And I think some people are alone and they don't have anyone. They travel alone, and each incarnation, they don't have that. And some people are just, you know, there's a soul mate, but not necessarily romantic. I do think that is very real. And I have that in my own life, where one of my closest friends, we had the same dream the same night about a past life, and we were married in a past life, and we had the same dream about my death. And
oh, man.
we were in a hospital and I was dying, and she was male and I was female, and we were married. And it was the same dream the same night, word for word, the exact same vision of this was what this was in this one life. And I used to smoke back then. So we were outside smoking, and I was like, I had the weirdest dream last night. She's like, me too. And I told her about my dream, and she just went white as sheet. She was like, I had the exact same dream, but I'm your husband. And I said, I was your wife.
Wow.
Giving me chills.
Yeah.
See, I would just be so fascinated to explore that like more. So thank you.
Yeah.
That's really that's neat.
So I've got a question about how magical and psychic practices have evolved over the ages. So I imagine that in the early days of humanity, it was probably kind of a wild west of learning the ropes, right? But like where we are in modernity today, and a lot of what you're telling me is that I'm getting the sense of there is a means, for example, of knowing who's an authentic practitioner versus a grifter, and there's a means of acknowledging authority and experience, and you've got a school, so there's at least some sort of sense of there being an institution to fall back on. Like so with that in mind, like how so it was just charting like a broad evolution of magic since the beginning to how much has changed and evolved to where we kind of have some sort of grip and some sort of means of identifying what's legit and what isn't.
Okay. In most cases, if someone promises you something that is not created naturally in this world, it is someone who's a grifter.
Oh.
So if there is no reality that Christina could fall in love, then a love spell is not going to work.
Yeah.
But there is reality, so that could work. But is there a reality that Christina can turn into a peacock? No. Now, there are spells where you can destroy someone's brain and make them think they're a peacock.
Dang.
There are those, and because that is based in reality, where people lose their mind and they believe that they're a peacock. So there are spells for that. That helps. Also, when there's no nod to history, so many things have survived in spite of persecution and imminent death, that when someone says, and I am calling out every TikTok hoax, I just need likes and followers, that they say you can substitute this with a white candle, they're not a real practitioner.
Okay.
Because there's a reason why so many things were passed down. There was one person who, I think I was talking to Christina about this. There was one person, she says she's a witch, and she took a bunch of cinnamon and poured it all over her arms. And she said, if you just rub this, you can bring money back into your life. And I said, that insult. And I said, that's not true. Because the main purpose of cinnamon in witchcraft is communication. And depending on what kind of salt you're using, you could be bringing communication of spirits, or you could be cleansing communication from yourself, depending on what kind of salt. So just telling people that, now there's a whole bunch of people rubbing cinnamon on their bodies. Ugh. Ouch. And it's causing the wrong thing. Why? They didn't literally pick up a book. Just pick up a book. Pick up a book. And people are following it because of it's simple, and I saw it on TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me sad. However, I read somewhere that in order for something to be real, you can verify that it's real because there has to be something real to fake.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's a good way to put it.
It's like Dr. Sledge said something similar, because he was talking about he does a lot of study, particularly in Inquisition material, and he was talking about, he's a bit of agnostic on the topic himself, but he was fascinated that the way he put it is like people don't make up rules against things that people aren't doing. So like, if in order for people to be persecuted and these things to be outlawed in the first case, like there's a reason that they even came up with the thought of outlawing it. Like something's going on.
Right.
So going back to the cinnamon, yeah, what I was trying to kind of ask as part of that question was, is there sort of, and I can't think of a better word, for lack of a better word, if there's sort of an orthodoxy nowadays. So we're like, the grifter on TikTok going like, rub your arms with cinnamon, you get money. You have some sort of knowledge that you're tapping into, established knowledge over time, like, oh no, that's not what cinnamon's for. Cinnamon actually has this use. So there's at least some tradition, some through line from those who came before that you can reference to like know what practices work. And that's what I'm curious about, is like, is there any sort of like orthodoxy or authoritative source of knowledge or body or something that you fall back on to weed out things?
There's cumulative. So there are some authors that have done great groups of research or a great mass of research, and then they document. But I like to cross-reference. So I have several books from different cultures that I kind of go to say, what do these different cultures have to say? And she's not totally wrong. Cinnamon can be used for money, but you need something else to trigger it in order for that to work. So just cinnamon and salt is going to be a communication spell. But if you have bay, for instance, and you add bay leaves to it, that could trigger the financial aspect of cinnamon so that it becomes a financial spell. But again, using the wrong salt means that you could wipe out your finances, or that spirits can bring your finances.
Oh, wow.
That would be such a bummer.
Right?
What? This is the wrong salt. Oh gosh. I owe how much money?
Yeah. There again, and that's why I have the school, is I just want to spread knowledge as much as we can. And we have this incredible group, and it can be any level of practitioner, which if you're brand new or you're established, we have this incredible group called the Mystic Circle. And they study from really good books with the head of our dark magic department, and they do spells together in their workshops. They work through, this is why this works, this is why it wouldn't work, what are the casting agents, and everything is very physical. You are doing it. It's not theoretical. Go on YouTube and watch people. You get feedback from practitioners, whether it's myself or run by the head of our dark magic department, Miss Val. You get feedback on camera from her saying, no, try it like this, do it like this. And you're practicing the craft like I was taught from my grandmother. It's how it should be taught. Instead of just watching videos, have one of us be your grandmother. We'll teach you the ways.
Oh, to have a witchy grandmother, that would have been nice.
Right. It's actually a good segue into one of our Patreon questions that we've got up. One of our listeners wanted to ask, and this kind of falls under me too, since I'm in the same boat. So let's say you've got zero previous knowledge of anything magic. Like you've seen a couple of Harry Potter movies, and that's about it. So if you're interested in, like, your school, for example, and you're coming in completely cold turkey, what would be a good starting point for the completely uninitiated?
I would start with, we have green magic and folk magic. Those are pretty good places to start. I tell everybody to start with root work. Mm-hmm. It is the discipline of hoodoo spellcraft, because you learn so much. You learn about liquids, so you learn about washes and sprays and potions. You learn about gree bags or mojo bags, so you learn how to work with herbs. You learn about poppets. The vast area that you cover, that's the place to start, is root work. And then what's great about hoodoo and root work is you don't have to be of African diasporic descent, and you don't have to believe in that tradition. It's supplementary to whatever tradition that you do believe. So we have had Christian students, Jewish students, Wiccan students, just across the board come to root work just to learn a huge area of witchcraft. And they also end up learning what they're good at and what they're not good at. So that's a go-to point: root work, green magic, folk magic. And then we also have dark magic, the elements of dark magic, where you go through the elements like you would in root work. You work on water-based, fire-based, earth-based, growth-based, spirit-based work, each week a different theme, but all based in baneful witchcraft.
So on a related note, so last time, you talked about how some people are handicapped, right, and don't have any. The loving term was potato, like no ability to really touch into anything. So what happens? How do you handle a new student who comes in? And I'm imagining that with no previous experience, I've intellectually come open to the possibility of magic in this other world, and then I come to learn it and find out I'm completely incapable. It's gotta suck to like open your eyes to like this is all real, but I can't touch it. Like so if somebody just finds out they're a muggle, for lack of a better word, like how do you handle them?
With care and with love, because it's rare that we have someone who can't practice the craft in some way. But if someone comes in and we can't find any way that they can produce outcomes with the craft, we also try to find out why. So we don't believe in victim blaming. You are wrong. It's all your fault. You didn't have the right intention, all that garbage. Let's sit down and figure out why the spell didn't work. And let's try it a different way. Let's try different ingredients. Let's try a different technique. Let's try a different culture. Let's try something else to see if we can get this to work for you and find out where your talents lie. In the very rare 1% that someone cannot do anything, they end up with a breadth of knowledge to still be able to decipher who is real and who isn't, and what is real and what isn't. So they end up still being a voice and a cavalier for the authentic. And that's just as important.
A watcher to the Highlanders.
Wow. I can't believe you remembered that.
I remember my Highlander movies.
So if you're someone who's not interested in the craft per se, but they've had some weird things happen to them, they maybe think there's some potential that they're sensitive. What course do you recommend as an intro to that?
I teach psychic development and mediumship, and that is the class to take. I only take 8 students at a time because I can't handle more than 8 psychic minds at a time. I end up being a bad teacher and thinking that different thoughts are coming from the wrong people. I just lose track. So I only take 8 students at a time. I teach it every other term. And it's so that people understand what kind of psychic they are, what their sensitivities are, how sensitive they are, what kinds of things that they grab onto as a psychic, and what kind of medium they are. So it's an intensive 6 weeks with, like I said, 8 people max. I cannot take more than 8 at a time. Whereas other courses, we can take more because the interaction is different. Mm-hmm. But for me to be an effective teacher, I have to be really sure of whom I'm connecting to. And so I have learned over the years that I can't handle more than 8. I can handle 9 if it's someone who's taking the course again. Because I already know them well.
That makes sense, yeah.
It's called Psychic Development and Mediumship. And you discover who you are as a psychic. I've had students take that class thinking that it is a mentalism class where they learn how to be a grifter. They want to be the next John Edwards, and then they find out, oh, this is I'm in the wrong space.
Yeah. It's not for you.
This is not for you. And there's 7 psychics in the room staring at you going, we know why you're here. Because we're psychic.
I'd be afraid to be that vulnerable, that I'd like that exposed where people can. That'd be hard for me. That'd be interesting at the same
You
time,
get used to it. You get used to it. The first 3 weeks, there's definitely this the walls are up and everybody's a little afraid. But as people start to just call things out, you become comfortable with, all right, it's okay. They're gonna know anyway, or not. And the teacher's gonna know or not. And you just get used to it. And even as a teacher, I have to be open about my life because they could just grab something intimate about my life, and I need to be able to confirm it in order to show them that they really are psychic. If I deny because I'm ashamed or try to hide something because I'm ashamed, then I'm doing them a disservice as their teacher. And that has been uncomfortable in the past.
Imagine. So are those classes in person, or does proximity not necessarily matter?
Proximity does not matter when it comes to psychic work.
Cool.
So we have students all over the world that jump in. One term was probably the widest in time zones. We had someone in Portugal and someone in Hawaii, and then we had every time zone in between the US. So we had people where it was morning, and we had people that was the middle of the night, and we're all there working together over Zoom. And I think it was during winter too. So it was like really warm in one area and freezing in another.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a wild class. But we offer tons of classes in the psychic department as well, but that's the place to start. Unless people want shamanic work, then they take spirit walking. So if they want to go down the shaman road, like to do things like soul retrievals or psychic surgery or past life work, they go down the shamanic road. If they want to work with spirits or work with people, they go down the psychic road. And I'm head of that department out of the 5 departments we have.
Cool. So speaking of which, what is what's the difference between just the terminology of magic versus psychic?
One is output, one is input. It's kind of the easiest way. Yeah, psychic we receive, and witchcraft or magic you put out. That's kind of the easiest.
Makes sense.
Okay, this is me being selfish because I've signed up for this course. Okay, so you have a new course, a mediumship course.
Ew.
And I signed up for it because I'm very curious and all that. But I know that like some people, like you said, some people are better at talking to like inhuman beings, and some are better at talking to the human deceased. During that mediumship class, are people going to get to try both, or is it just more toward human deceased folks?
No, we find out in kind of a gritty way to find out what kind of medium you are. Not the safest thing that we do at Bearbridge. But we kind of find out we find out what is called to you. And in some cases, we find out someone's a plant medium or a pet medium. And
oh, cool.
Yeah. And they can talk to plants. They can talk to animals. They understand what they need and want. And then some are like me, where you talk to monsters. Some talk to the human dead, some talk to angels, some talk to demons, they're infernal mediums. Some talk to deities, they're called oracles. And we find out day one what wants to talk to you.
Okay, cool. I'm excited. That was a very selfish question, but I wanted to know.
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. That's something.
Yeah.
See, if I were to be brave enough to try this, that's something I would want to explore. If I may segue into that, have you ever encountered a student who was very interested to learn that, but the door was, say, they closed their door and they were trying to open it, but then you found a way to open it and it turned out they were really, really good at it?
Yes. Yes. There's a student of mine, she's a dark medium like I am, which can be scary, right? Spider dogs and the like.
Spider dogs.
So she was, of course, afraid. I mean, naturally, she's afraid. She's been programmed with horror, with media, with religion to be afraid.
Yeah.
And the best way to desensitize is exposure therapy. And to just kind of put her in scary situations for little pieces at a time until she breaks that down and can then approach the veil again and again and again and see better and see better. But yeah, fear is usually the block, which is also why I like my in-person retreat. So we have an in-person psychic retreat where I can literally stand next to you and hold your hand, and I'm like, I'm right here. And if things go wrong, I'll take care of it. But we're all going to be okay. Let's go ahead and go move forward and go talk to this spirit. I'm right here.
The retreats are really fun. So you have several right now that are open for participation. They have like different topics, I guess. Themes. There we go. Themes. I was like, there's a word, a very simple word, but I can't think of it.
So we have our shamanic retreat in Maine,
Mhm.
and we only have 2 spaces left because I only take 10 students. So it can be, again, intimate, and I'm a teacher, so I want to be able to sit and talk and dive into every student. And if there's so many people, I can't do that. So the shamanic retreat is in Maine in June. Our psychic retreat is in Long Beach, California in August. Our witchcraft retreat is in October in Columbus, Ohio. And then we have a catch-all end-of-year celebration. So if you're like, I don't know, I want a little bit of everything, we're doing that in New Orleans right before New Year's. So right between Christmas and New Year's, ditch your family, come be witchy, come talk to spirits, and then go back to your family.
Oh my gosh, our next podcast on location. Let's go to the retreat.
I'm in.
Man, New Orleans has got to be a hot spot of sorts, right?
Oh
I have never been. I'm so excited.
I've never
And
been
it's a
either.
good time of year. It's right after the winter solstice. Let's see what is there. And I don't think it's going to be terribly crowded either. So it's a good time for us to come together, especially as academics, learn, experience, play with spirits.
See, New Orleans.
Yes.
That would be a neat place to go for me because I love history, I love ghosts, and I also like vampires. So New Orleans. Let's do it.
Oh, speaking of hotspots, I wanted to ask. So for our last season finale, just a few weekends ago, we went to the Crescent Hotel, which is supposed to be one of the most, haunted hotels in America. And we spent the night there. And one of the things that I've been thinking about since, there's a number of pretty well-known, notorious, ghosts that the staff have come very accustomed to interacting with. But you know, as is typical of any haunted place, a lot of the stories are of a shelf moving or a door opening and stuff like that. And and of course the methods that we tried to use to interact with anything were, you know, like the Estes method, or, you know, using recording equipment and whatnot. So I've wondered, like, obviously you can't get a ghost to just go, "Oh, hey everybody, I'm a ghost, my name's Ted, how you doing?" So what I've often heard is that there is it requires an immense amount of energy or difficulty to do any sort of interaction or communication from one plane to the other. Is that true? Like, what's the mechanics of that?
Yes. And there are people who are better they're just more gifted, and it doesn't take them as much energy as others. So for me to reach out and talk to the human dead takes an awful lot of energy, and I'm exhausted. But I have students and people in my practice. So I don't do mediumship readings because I couldn't do anything else. If I just did one medium reading, I'd be wiped for the rest of the day.
Right.
So I have mediums that work for me who it's really easy for them. It's where their talents are. And think about, let's take an example that's mundane, like building a door. So there are some people who in building or installing a door, like from tree to wall, yeah, it costs them energy, but they're on it and they got it and they do it and it's done. If I had to do that, it would be done wrong, and it would cost me a lot of energy and a lot of tears.
Yeah.
My back would hurt. I'd have something in my hand.
I'm gonna hurt myself. Yeah. So there are certain people where the energy output it also feeds them, right? It's who they are, and it's exciting and it's healthy for them. Whereas for someone who isn't, it would cost them a lot more energy because it's not part of their natural makeup. And same thing with, let's say, basketball. Someone who's really good at it, of course it costs them energy, but it also feeds them, and there's kind of a loop, and they're good at it. If I'm playing basketball, I am a short person who my vision's not great. So it's going to cost me a lot of energy, even if I'm having fun.
Yeah.
Now in reverse, would, you know, if somebody were, say, a black hole of crippling anxiety, would that just...
Oh, we're not gonna let that go, are we?
Nope, we're never gonna let that go. Would that just repel anything pretty much from happening?
So we had a funny experience at the Crescent. So
Oh gosh, yeah. So that's one of the things I picked up on. So me and Chris both did the Estes method where we were listening, right? And I went first. And one of the things that I picked up, I picked up the name of the person that's supposedly in that room. I did pick up like 2 times.
You and I both did.
Yeah. And then right after that, I got crippling anxiety. And I was like, okay, that was like really specific.
And then all 4 of us, or like me and her sister, just turned towards James, and he's just like, he has his head down, like,
go take a break.
Did I just get called out by a ghost? Like, come on.
But okay, we have kept Aly a little long. Do we have any wrap-up questions that we need to ask?
Oh geez, I could go another hour.
Need to
Well,
do a
let's
part
come back
3.
for a part 3.
Yeah, let's do it.
yeah.
Let's do that.
Well, Aly, why don't you give a shout out to our listeners and let them know what's going on in your world?
All right. So I am the headmaster of Bearbridge Academy of Witchcraft and Psychic Development, and it's bearbridgeacademy.com. Bear is in rar, not bear is in naked. Spell it right and you'll find us.
The other's a completely different kind of school.
Yeah, totally different.
Totally different school. And then my private practice is called the Otso Salon, O-T-S-O Salon, where you can hire me or practitioners whom I have vetted and are talented and also have repeatable outcomes, incredible practitioners who I believe in certain areas they are better than I am, so I hired them. You can hire me or my practitioners at Otso Salon for psychic, healing or witchcraft services or spirit problems, or learn about them yourself and do it yourself at Bearbridge Academy. And then I believe we have a coupon code. For
We
your
do.
listeners, yes?
Little podcast. Yep. And I forgot the amount, but I think it's on. We tack this on at the end, like automatically. We have it pre-recorded, so I don't want to say the wrong amount.
All righty. Well, Aly,
yeah.
thank you once again for joining us. And
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you for having me. I always have such a great time with you guys, and
Same.
I wish that I was part of your. You guys have been friends for a long time. I want to be part of this tribe.
It's been life-saving. Like, and it's James and I have a little quote that I shared with him a while back, and of all places, I was in a graveyard and was on a tombstone, and it said, "I knew when I met you, an adventure was about to begin."
Oh.
And so me, him, and just all of us, that's how it's been for us. So.
Well, I'm gonna try to drag these two, and then maybe we can get my sister Heather to go to the retreat at the end of the year. That would be really fun.
Yeah.
Use the same coupon code. It works for the retreats as well, and it's a huge discount. Use the coupon
Yes.
code.
I do
Little
love New Orleans.
podcast.
New Orleans is a happening place.